Today, we are taking a look at a truly landmark document, the Leaders Declaration from the G20 South Africa Summit. This meeting, held in Johannesburg on November 22nd and 23rd, 2025, wasn't just another annual gathering.
No, not at all.
It was historic. I mean, this is the first time the G20 Summit was ever hosted on the African continent.
And you can really feel the influence of that location, woven into every single commitment they made. Our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Right.
We're going to dive deep and try to understand the major global challenges and the solutions that the world's largest economies articulated. And we'll do it through the lens of the three core pillars of the South African presidency.
Which are solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
Exactly.
Before we jump into the heavy policy, we have to talk about the philosophical anchor they set up right at the beginning. It wasn't just a political summit. It was founded on the African philosophy of Ubuntu.
It was absolutely essential to the framing. The leaders affirmed that philosophy, I am because we are. And it's such a powerful statement of global interconnectedness.
Yeah.
It reminds everyone in the room that in a world that feels so fragmented, defined by geopolitical competition, multilateral cooperation is. It's the absolute minimum. The Declaration makes it clear the only way forward is one that genuinely ensures no one gets left behind.
That idea of interconnectedness, then, immediately sets the stage for the challenging global backdrop they were all facing.
Absolutely. The first section, solidarity and stability, it starts with this really sobering acknowledgement of reality. Rising geopolitical competition, instability, heightened conflicts, just immense human suffering across multiple continents.
And they had to speak to that directly. They reaffirmed their commitment to international law, the UN Charter, and they explicitly condemned all attacks against civilians and infrastructure.
Right.
But what really stands out to me is just the sheer breadth of active conflicts they committed to addressing.
It's remarkable, isn't it? The number of intense, ongoing situations that made it into the final document. They committed to working toward peace in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the occupied Palestinian territory, and Ukraine.
Wow.
Having to tackle that level of global instability just to even begin a constructive economic conversation, it just shows you the scale of the challenge they face.
And that instability, of course, it quickly translates into severe economic strain for vulnerable nations. It becomes impossible to ignore the debt crisis. Particularly in Africa and other low-income countries, which the leaders identified as maybe the single biggest obstacle to inclusive growth.
And the statistics are, they're horrifying, really. They make it clear why this is an emergency. The G20 noted that interest payments on total external public debt have more than doubled over the past decade for these low-income countries.
More than doubled.
Think about that. When your debt payments double in 10 years, every potential dollar for education, for healthcare, for a green energy transition, it's instead going out the door to service interest. It just completely arrests development.
So the G20's main tool for this, the Common Framework, has been criticized for being slow. Are the solutions they're proposing here just more of the same, or is there a real chance for acceleration?
That's the critical question. They are committed to strengthening the Common Framework, which, it is making slow progress. We have 4 countries, Chad, Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia, that have received treatments.
Right.
But the innovative part, I think, comes from exploring new financing options, specifically the voluntary use of debt for development, debt for climate, or similar swaps.
For anyone listening who hasn't heard of these swaps are crucial, right? They shift the whole conversation from just pure repayment pressure to actually leveraging that repayment to fund local projects.
Exactly. Instead of demanding cash that gets shipped out of the country, the creditor agrees to reduce or cancel the debt. In exchange, the debtor country commits those funds to, say, domestic climate action or sustainable development projects.
So it turns a burden into a tool.
It turns debt from a burden into a tool for investment. Yes. They've also emphasized using crisis-resilient debt clauses, which can automatically pause payments during an emergency, which gives countries vital breathing room.
But I think the most profound change, the real structural shift in this entire section, is about enhancing Africa's permanent voice in global finance. This goes way beyond just temporary aid.
This is the moment. This is the aha policy nugget for you. The commitment to create a 25th chair at the IMF Executive Board specifically to enhance the voice and representation of sub-Saharan Africa.
That's huge.
It's massive. Historically, many African countries have had to share an executive director, which, it dilutes their influence. Carving out a 25th seat is a concrete structural reform of the whole international financial architecture.
Right.
It means decisions about Africa will be made with Africa, not just for them. It's a huge victory for representation.
And it really shows that the location of the summit actually mattered.
Politically, it's a major achievement. It confirms that the African Union's new status as a full G20 member is being translated into tangible governance reform.
Okay, so let's move from stability to our second pillar, sustainability. This has a huge focus on climate, energy access, and disaster resilience.
Disaster risk reduction is a top priority. As the declaration notes, the increasing frequency and intensity of climate disasters, they just disproportionately impact the world's most vulnerable.
We're talking small island developing states and least developed countries.
Exactly. And the discussion really moved away from reactive, sort of ex post action, sending aid after the storm hits, toward proactive ex ante action, prevention and anticipation.
And how do they do that?
Well, this shift relies on strengthening prearranged financing mechanisms, things like parametric insurance and risk pools.
Parametric insurance, that's the one that pays out automatically when specific trigger is met, right? So if a hurricane hits a certain wind speed,
the funds are released instantly. Exactly. It bypasses that slow, often bureaucratic process of filing a damage claim after the fact. It's about speed and flexibility, anticipating the shock.
And this all ties into the global goal of universal coverage for early warning systems.
By 2027, yes. And it was great to see that the host, South Africa, was commended for being the first country to launch its roadmap under that UN initiative. It shows how the presidency translated intent into immediate action.
It sets a high bar. Now, connecting climate to development, we have to talk about the African energy inequality gap. The numbers here are they're devastating.
They really are.
The declaration notes that over 600 million Africans still don't have electricity. But the clean cooking crisis is maybe even more shocking. An estimated 1 billion lack access to clean cooking fuels.
And that has a staggering immediate human cost. 2 million Africans lose their lives every single year because of the indoor air pollution from burning charcoal or wood.
2 million.
Addressing this isn't just about a clean energy transition. It's one of the most urgent public health crises on the continent.
So to combat this, the G20 reaffirmed support for global goals, tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency improvements by 2030. But they also backed that up with a huge targeted African initiative.
Yes, the launch of Mission 300. This is a massive initiative led by the World Bank and the African Development Bank, and it aims to connect 300 million people to electricity in Africa by 2030.
Wow.
It's a huge commitment that recognizes you can't address climate goals if you don't address the energy access deficit first.
And finally, under sustainability, we have the materials that make all this possible. Critical minerals. The demand is just going to keep increasing.
Right.
But historically, resource-rich nations have often they dig it up and ship it out, profiting only from the raw material.
And the G20 Critical Minerals Framework wants to radically change that dynamic. It's a voluntary blueprint designed to ensure these resources drive prosperity through local beneficiation at source.
Meaning you do the value-added stuff, the refining, the processing, in the producer countries themselves.
Exactly, instead of just exporting the raw ore. Now, that sounds great in theory, but it's immensely difficult to execute.
I was going to say that requires serious political will, massive infrastructure.
Huge investment, technology transfer, you name it. But the vision is clear. These minerals have to become a catalyst for deep economic growth for the countries that actually hold the reserves.
Okay, that brings us to our third and final pillar, equality and inclusive human development. The foundation here is tackling inequality and unemployment, especially through industrialization.
Right. They welcome these new G20 high-level principles on sustainable industrial policy. And the key thing here is linking industrial growth with labor standards. The framework emphasizes good quality jobs, fair wages, and robust labor institutions.
It's about making sure that economic policies drive both productivity and equity.
Precisely.
And where this declaration really shines, I think, is in setting concrete, measurable targets for women and youth.
These are the metrics we can actually track. First, for youth, they introduce the Nelson Mandela Bay target.
Okay.
This aims to reduce the rate of young people not in employment, education, or training the NEET rate by another 5% by 2030. Targeting the NEAT rate specifically gives governments a very clear mission.
And for women, they adopted the revised Brisbane Equity Goal.
Right, to reduce the gender gap in labor force participation by 25% by 2030. And you can see the continuity in the name, referencing a South African city, bringing new focus to an older goal.
So the third target is maybe the most challenging one politically.
The new pay equity goal, yes. Yeah. It's incredibly specific to progressively work towards reducing the unadjusted wage gap between men and women by 15% by 2035.
Setting a defined percentage over a defined time period? That's a major step.
It really is. It moves the conversation from just, aspiration to actual accountability. It forces systemic changes in transparency and hiring across all the G20 economies.
Equality also means facing the fundamental crisis of food security. The numbers are still just horrific. Up to 720 million people experienced hunger in 2024. 2.6 billion couldn't afford healthy diets.
So the response was the adoption of the Ubuntu approaches on food security and nutrition. And there's that philosophy again, informing the policy. The approach is all about strengthening local, resilient food systems.
So moving away from relying on imports that can be hit by conflict or supply shocks.
Exactly. It's about food sovereignty. The support for Africa specifically includes investing in seed banks, local fertilizer production, and supporting the continent-wide free trade agreement to build regional resilience.
Looking to the future now, we have AI and global governance reform. The G20 recognizes AI's potential for good, but stresses the need for trustworthy AI that protects human rights and privacy.
And keeping with the theme of representation, they launched the AI for Africa initiative. This is designed to promote access to computing power, talent, and crucially representative data sets in African countries.
To avoid bias.
To avoid embedding bias into AI systems by only using data from the global north. It's about building inclusive tech from the ground up.
And finally, that huge statement on governance reform itself. They explicitly acknowledged the urgent need to reform the UN Security Council.
This might be the boldest geopolitical statement in the whole declaration. They are specifically calling for an enlarged composition that improves the representation of underrepresented regions, Africa, Asia-Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean.
It's a clear consensus among the world's biggest economies that the old power structure is outdated.
It must be adapted to 21st century realities, yes.
So, stepping back, the 2025 Johannesburg Summit was clearly defined by those three pillars: solidarity, equality, and sustainability, all connected by Ubuntu, a call for shared responsibility.
And they very carefully set up a framework for continuity. The G20 affirmed the AU as a full member in its second year, and they launched a new Africa engagement framework that runs from 2025 to 2030. This isn't just a one-off event.
Right, it's a multi-year commitment. And the baton now passes from South Africa to the next presidencies. The United States in 2026, the United Kingdom in 2027, and the Republic of Korea in 2028. The agenda defined in Johannesburg stays global.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought, talking about all these massive new financing commitments, the new IMF chair, Mission 300, funds for disaster resilience. It's all about channeling money into development.
Right.
But the declaration itself contains this crucial, sobering counter-narrative. It notes a staggering drain on African resources. At least USD 88 billion is lost from Africa every single year.
88 billion?
Lost to illicit financial flows, or IFFs. That's a massive number. It dwarfs nearly every aid package we've discussed.
Wow.
Now, the G20 did commit to creating a roadmap to combat these IFFs. So the question that should linger for you is this. Considering the commitment to fund things like Mission 300, how much more quickly could those profound goals be reached if the global community first successfully implemented that roadmap to stop the staggering $88 billion annual losses? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes stopping the money from flowing out is just as important, if not more so, than funding the next step forward.